Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story.
A sharp cry echoed through the maternity ward. Before the room fell quiet again, the woman in bed number 7 pressed both hands against the rails as another contraction hit her hard enough to steal the air from her lungs. Her hospital gown clung to her skin. Sweat rolled down the side of her face into her hairline, while the monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. She tried to breathe through the pain the way the nurse had shown her 20 minutes earlier, but fear kept interrupting every breath halfway. The chair beside her bed stayed empty long enough to become humiliating. At first, she kept looking toward the doorway, expecting him to walk back in with coffee or food, or one of those nervous apologies husbands gave when they panicked before becoming fathers. But the doorway stayed empty again and again. A nurse hurried past her room, carrying fresh blankets, before stopping long enough to offer a tired smile. "He's still parking the car, honey?" She forced one back. "I think so," even saying it sounded weak, because deep down, she already knew. Another contraction tightened through her stomach. She gasped softly and reached for her phone on the bedside tray. 3 unread messages sat beneath her husband's name. "Please come back. I'm scared. They said it's getting close." No response. The typing bubble never appeared. Across the hallway, laughter spilled out from another maternity room. A young woman laughed so hard she started coughing while her husband kept saying, "Baby, breathe before our son comes out laughing too." More laughter, soft kisses, excited whispers. The kind of moment that was supposed to belong to everybody in this hallway tonight. Her eyes drifted slowly toward the empty chair again. That chair was starting to feel louder than the pain. A doctor stepped inside briefly, scanning her chart while speaking quickly. "We may need to move faster if the contractions keep progressing this way." She nodded without hearing half of it, because her attention stayed fixed on the hallway outside, waiting, still waiting. A few seconds later, an older black nurse entered carrying extra towels under one arm. She had silver streaks in her braids and reading glasses hanging low on her nose. She took one look at the empty chair, then at the untouched hospital bag near the wall, then at the phone in the woman's shaking hands. The nurse sighed slowly. "Oh, baby." That was all it took. Her face folded instantly. She turned away fast, embarrassed by the tears pushing into her eyes. "He said he just needed air," she whispered. The nurse pulled the rolling stool closer to the bed. He said hospitals make him nervous." Another contraction hit before she could finish speaking. Her fingers tightened around the rail. The nurse grabbed her hand immediately. "Breathe through it. Come on now. Don't fight your body." She tried. God, she tried. But fear kept taking over. When the pain eased again, she looked toward the door one more time. Still nobody. The nurse shook her head under her breath. "If that man don't get himself back in this room," she muttered, "I got 2 slippers and a cousin fresh out of divorce court, ready to hunt him down." A weak laugh escaped through tears before she covered her face. That tiny moment of humor cracked the pressure just enough for her to breathe again. Outside the room, another baby started crying somewhere down the hall. Nurses moved quickly between rooms, while overhead speakers called doctors to different floors. Life kept moving, but inside room 7, time felt stuck. She unlocked her phone again, called him, straight to voicemail. Her lips trembled. "Please," she whispered to nobody. Across the hallway, the other husband said proudly, "You're doing amazing, babe." That sentence hit harder than the contractions, because nobody had said those words to her all night. She turned her face toward the wall quickly, before the nurse could see the fresh tears coming. But the nurse saw them anyway, and for a moment, neither woman spoke. The silence between them felt painfully honest, because both of them finally understood the same thing at the exact same time. He wasn't coming back. Welcome back to Mr. George's Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button, because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. And if somebody has ever abandoned you when you needed them most, go ahead and like this video. Stories like this deserve to reach people who need hope tonight. Subscribe to Mr. George Stories and stay with me, because what happened to her that night changed more than one life. Another contraction crashed through her body so suddenly that the phone slipped from her hand onto the blanket. She cried out before she could stop herself. The older nurse stood immediately. "I know, baby. I know." The monitor beside the bed started beeping faster while voices filled the hallway outside. Two nurses hurried past the room carrying equipment toward another emergency down the corridor. Nobody slowed down. Nobody stopped. Inside room 7, fear started growing faster than the pain. She tried reaching for the breathing technique again, but panic kept breaking her rhythm. Inhale, sharp pain. Exhale, another wave. Her chest tightened. "I can't do this," she whispered. "Yes, you can." No, I can't." The next contraction bent her forward hard enough to steal the rest of the sentence. Tears rolled down her cheeks while she gripped the metal rail with both hands. The older nurse pressed the call button again. "We need another set of hands in here." No answer yet. The maternity floor had become chaos. A newborn cried somewhere nearby. A doctor called instructions from down the hall. Shoes moved quickly across polished floors, while monitors beeped from different rooms. Everything around her sounded loud except the one thing she needed most, a familiar voice. A hand. Somebody. Her breathing turned uneven. "Oh, God." The nurse moved closer. "Look at me. Don't let fear take over now." But fear already had. Because pain was one thing. Being left alone inside it felt different. Her hands shook violently against the rail. And that was the exact moment someone paused outside the doorway. Not a nurse, not a doctor, just a man in a dark coat holding a phone loosely at his side. He had been walking quickly through the hallway moments earlier, distracted by a tense conversation that ended with him saying quietly, "No. Push the meeting to Monday." I said Monday. He barely looked up until he passed room 7. Then he heard her cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken. The kind of sound people make when they finally realize nobody is coming. He stopped walking. Inside the room, she squeezed her eyes shut as another contraction hit. "I can't breathe." The older nurse looked toward the hallway desperately. "Sir?" He stepped inside immediately. "I need you to stay with her for 1 second," the nurse said quickly. "I gotta grab the doctor." Before he could respond, she disappeared back into the hallway. Now, it was just the two of them, a stranger beside her hospital bed. She looked up briefly through tears, embarrassed almost instantly. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For this." Her voice cracked on the last word. He glanced once toward the empty chair beside her bed. That told him enough. Another wave of pain hit her. She grabbed the rail again so tightly her knuckles turned pale. That was when he moved closer, quietly, slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. "Hey," he said softly. She tried breathing again, but panic kept interrupting every breath. Then he gently placed his hand over hers, warm, steady, present. "Hey, breathe," he said. "You're not alone." For the first time all night, her body stopped fighting quite so hard. Not because the pain disappeared, not because her situation changed, but because somebody finally stayed. Her trembling fingers slowly tightened around his hand while tears slipped silently down the side of her face. And strangely, he didn't pull away. Rain tapped softly against the hospital windows, while the maternity floor carried on with its usual midnight chaos. A nurse pushed a cart full of fresh linens past room 7, while another hurried toward the elevators, calling for a doctor who still hadn't arrived upstairs. Inside the room, Sarah leaned forward carefully on the edge of the hospital bed, while another contraction tightened across her stomach. Her breathing turned shaky again, not as violent as before, but enough to remind her this night was nowhere close to over. The older nurse returned, carrying a fresh cup of ice chips. "There she is," the nurse said softly. "Still breathing. Still fighting." Sarah tried smiling. It barely lasted a second. Her eyes drifted toward the empty chair automatically before she caught herself doing it. The nurse noticed, anyway. That woman noticed everything. "You need water?" Sarah shook her head. "You need me to call your mama?" Another small shake. The nurse pulled the blanket higher across Sarah's legs. "What about your sister? Cousin? Friend?" "I'm okay." The answer came too fast, too rehearsed. The nurse gave her a look that said she didn't believe one word of it, but she let it go for now. Sarah looked down at the tiny hospital bracelet around her wrist, while exhaustion settled deeper into her body. Her phone remained face down beside her blanket, silent. No missed calls, no apology, Nothing. That hurt worse now, because anger at least would have felt like effort. This silence felt easy. The nurse sat briefly near the bed. You know, she said quietly, men get scared in hospitals sometimes. Sarah let out a tired laugh through her nose. That's what he said. He said he just needed air. The nurse folded her arms. Baby, unless that man went outside to personally fight oxygen itself, he should have been back by now. That earned a real laugh. Short, weak, but real. For a moment, the pressure inside the room loosened slightly. Then another contraction hit. Sarah grabbed the blanket immediately. The nurse stood beside her again. Come on. Breathe through it. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut. I'm trying. I know you are. Pain rolled across her stomach hard enough to bend her forward. The nurse rubbed slow circles across her back while Sarah tried controlling her breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale. Her breath broke halfway. Tears filled her eyes again, instantly. Not from pain this time. From humiliation. Because women down this hallway were holding hands with their husbands right now, laughing, crying together, starting families together. And she was sitting here, trying not to fall apart in front of strangers. The contraction finally eased enough for her shoulders to relax again. The nurse handed her a tissue without saying anything. Sarah wiped her face quickly. I didn't think he'd actually leave. That sentence sat heavily between them. The nurse looked toward the doorway before answering carefully. Some people panic when life gets real. Sarah stared down at her blanket. No. This started before tonight. The nurse stayed quiet, not pushing, just listening. Sarah swallowed hard. He's been distant for months. A pause. Every conversation turns into an argument. Another pause. I kept telling myself it was stress. The nurse leaned back slowly in her chair. And what you telling yourself now? Sarah didn't answer immediately, because deep down she already knew the answer. She just hated hearing it out loud. Outside the room, another burst of laughter came from the neighboring maternity suite. A man's excited voice followed. She got your nose already. More laughter. Sarah turned her face away instantly. That moment stayed with her longer than she expected. Not because she envied strangers, but because she realized how badly she had lowered her expectations over the past year. She stopped expecting tenderness long before tonight. Stopped expecting effort too. By the end, she was grateful for crumbs. A text back. A ride to appointments. 5 calm minutes without tension. That realization hurt quietly. The nurse studied her face carefully. You hungry? Sarah shook her head. You lying again. I think I'm gonna throw up. Well, that's honest at least. Another weak laugh escaped her. The nurse stood. I'll go see if the cafeteria still got soup that don't taste like punishment. Before leaving, she paused near the doorway. And baby? Sarah looked up. If he don't walk back through that door tonight, don't let your heart chase somebody who's comfortable leaving it behind. The room became very still after she left. Not silent. Still. Sarah leaned back slowly against the bed and stared at the ceiling tiles above her. Her body felt exhausted in ways sleep couldn't fix. She rested one hand against her stomach gently. The baby shifted slightly beneath her touch. A small movement. Tiny, alive. Fresh tears filled her eyes instantly. I'm sorry, she whispered. She didn't even know who she was apologizing to anymore. The baby, herself, God, maybe all three. Her phone suddenly vibrated against the bed. She grabbed it so fast, the blanket slipped sideways. One message. Her chest tightened immediately, then dropped. Unknown number. Your car has been towed from level 2 parking. That was it. No husband, no explanation, nothing. She laughed once under her breath, not because anything was funny, because disappointment was starting to feel embarrassing now. A few minutes later, voices rose near the nurse's station outside. Someone arguing loudly over insurance paperwork. A crying newborn, rolling wheels across tile floors. Life kept moving around her while she sat frozen in the middle of hers. Then the door opened again. The older nurse returned carrying crackers, soup, and 2 tiny bottles of apple juice balanced against her arm. Look what I stole legally. Sarah wiped her face quickly before the nurse noticed. Too late. The nurse noticed everything. Without speaking, she placed the food tray carefully beside the bed before adjusting Sarah's blanket again. You got people who love you? Sarah nodded slowly. My family's in Houston. And where are we? Dallas. The nurse opened the cracker. So tomorrow we call them before I personally start cussing people out. That pulled another tired smile from Sarah. You really would, wouldn't you? The nurse looked offended. Baby, I'm too old to bluff. For the first time all night, Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly, just slightly. The nurse sat beside her while she forced herself to eat a few crackers. Outside the room, another woman laughed happily somewhere down the hall. This time, Sarah didn't look toward the sound, because she finally understood something painful. Waiting for him was hurting her more than his absence already had, and somewhere deep inside herself, she was beginning to stop expecting that door to open at all. Around 3 in the morning, the maternity floor grew quieter, not calm, just heavier. The kind of late-night exhaustion that settled into hospital walls after too many emergencies and too little sleep. Sarah sat halfway upright in bed while dull pain continued pressing across her lower back in slow waves. The contractions had spaced out slightly, but her body still felt tense from hours of fear and disappointment. The soup beside her had gone cold. She barely touched it. The older nurse walked back into the room carrying fresh blankets over one arm. Well, she said, you still here? Sarah looked up weakly. I considered escaping through the window. The nurse snorted. Girl, this on the 4th floor. You ain't escaping nowhere except heaven. That earned a quiet laugh. Tiny moments like that kept Sarah from falling apart completely. The nurse unfolded a warm blanket carefully across her legs. You get any sleep? Sarah shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, another contraction shows up acting unemployed. Sounds about right. The nurse checked the monitor briefly before adjusting Sarah's IV line with practiced hands. Outside the room, wheels rolled across the hallway again. A nurse whispered instructions to another doctor nearby. Then came laughter. That same couple again. The woman across the hall sounded exhausted but happy. Oh my God, she has your forehead. Her husband answered proudly. That baby came out already judging me. More laughter followed. Real laughter. The kind built from relief and shared fear finally ending together. Sarah stared quietly at the blanket over her lap. She tried not listening, tried focusing on the monitor, tried focusing on breathing. But every happy sound from that room landed somewhere painful inside her chest. The older nurse noticed her expression immediately. You know what I hate? Sarah looked up. People who chew loudly, and men who disappear during labor. A weak smile touched Sarah's face. That specific? Very. The nurse folded her arms dramatically. If a woman pushing a whole human being into this world don't scare a man into acting right, nothing will. Sarah looked down again. He wasn't always like this. The words came quietly, almost defensive. The nurse leaned against the counter. They never are in the beginning. That sentence sat heavily in the room. Sarah rubbed her forehead slowly. I keep replaying tonight in my head. Dangerous hobby. I'm serious. I know. Sarah swallowed hard. I should have noticed sooner. The nurse stayed quiet. Sarah continued softly. Every appointment felt forced. He stopped touching my stomach months ago. He barely talked about the baby anymore. Every time I asked what was wrong, she looked away. He made me feel dramatic. For a second, the room became painfully quiet. Not awkward, just honest. The nurse finally sighed. Baby, some people leave emotionally long before they leave physically. That line hit harder than Sarah expected, because it explained everything too clearly. She remembered dinners filled with silence, phone calls ignored, excuses, late nights, distance growing inch by inch, until the relationship barely felt warm anymore. And somehow she still convinced herself things would change once the baby came. That hurt her pride now. Another contraction tightened across her stomach suddenly. Sarah inhaled sharply and grabbed the side rail again. The nurse moved beside her immediately. Easy now. Breathe through it. Sarah nodded while tears slipped quietly down her face. Not loud crying, just exhaustion leaking out slowly. The contraction passed after several long seconds. The nurse handed her another tissue. You want to know something? Sarah sniffed softly. What? You still doing better than half the fathers on this floor. That caught her off guard. What? I'm serious. One man passed out earlier near the vending machine and blamed low blood sugar. Despite herself, Sarah laughed. The nurse pointed toward the hallway dramatically. Another one cried harder than his wife. Security almost offered him juice and emotional counseling. Sarah covered her face briefly while laughing through tears. The older nurse grinned proudly. There she go. I knew you still had a little life left in you. That warmth mattered more than Sarah wanted to admit, because strangers had shown her more care tonight than the man she married. That realization stayed with her. Outside the room, the neighboring couple started talking again. Soft voices, excited whispers. The husband suddenly said, "You did amazing tonight." Sarah's smile faded instantly. Her eyes lowered toward her blanket again before she could stop herself. The nurse noticed, again, always. Without speaking, she pulled the chair closer beside the bed and sat down heavily. "You know why women survive heartbreak better than men sometimes?" Sarah wiped beneath her eyes. "Why?" "Because women already know how to carry pain and keep functioning." Sarah looked at her quietly. The nurse shrugged. Still unfair, though. That honesty made Sarah's chest tighten unexpectedly. Not because it fixed anything. Because somebody finally acknowledged how cruel this night actually felt. No fake positivity. No forced silver lining. Just truth. Sarah leaned back slowly against the pillows. "My mom warned me." "Oh," she said, "never beg somebody to care." Smart woman. "I thought love meant staying patient." The nurse tilted her head slightly. "Patience, only healthy when both people still trying." Sarah stared silently at the monitor beside her bed. That sentence stayed with her longer than she expected. Outside, footsteps crossed the hallway again before fading into another wing of the maternity floor. The neighboring baby suddenly started crying. The husband laughed softly. "I got her, babe. Rest." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. That one sentence nearly broke her completely, because she realized how badly she wanted partnership tonight. Not perfection, not money, not speeches, just somebody willing to stay. Fresh tears slid down her cheeks silently. This time, she didn't bother hiding them. The nurse reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. "Let it out." And she did. Not dramatically, not loudly. Her body simply gave up pretending she was okay. The crying came quietly at first, then harder. Months of disappointment started spilling out between contractions and exhausted breaths. "I don't understand why I wasn't enough," she whispered. The nurse's expression softened immediately. "Oh, baby." Sarah covered her mouth while crying. "I tried so hard. I know. I defended him to everybody. I know. I kept making excuses." The nurse grabbed another tissue box before speaking carefully. "Listen to me." Sarah looked up through tears. "A man leaving during your hardest moment says everything about him and nothing about your worth." That sentence landed deeply, not because it erased the pain, because for the first time tonight, somebody separated her value from his failure. Sarah lowered her eyes again while breathing unevenly. The nurse sat beside her quietly for a moment before speaking again. "And if he don't come back?" She adjusted her glasses. "I got cousins with slippers and criminal records." A broken laugh escaped Sarah instantly. The nurse nodded firmly. "I'm serious too. One of them on probation with excellent aim." That laugh turned into crying again halfway through. But this time the tears felt different, less panicked, more exhausted. Eventually, the room settled again. The nurse dimmed the lights slightly before standing near the doorway. "You try resting a little." Sarah nodded weakly. The older woman paused before leaving. "You ain't alone tonight. Remember that?" Then she disappeared back into the hallway. Sarah remained still beneath the blankets, while the monitor continued its steady rhythm beside her bed. Beep, beep, beep. Across the hall, the neighboring couple whispered softly to their newborn daughter. Inside room 7, Sarah slowly turned toward the empty chair one last time. This time, she didn't expect it to change, and somehow, that hurt even more. By 4 in the morning, exhaustion had settled deep into Sarah's bones. Not ordinary tiredness, the kind that made every thought feel heavier than it should. The maternity floor had quieted some, but room 7 still carried tension inside its walls. The contractions were getting stronger again, closer together too. Sarah gripped the blanket tightly as another wave rolled through her stomach. Her breathing broke halfway. The older nurse checked the monitor quickly before looking back at her. "Okay," she said calmly. "Baby's definitely not planning to wait till sunrise." Sarah let out a shaky breath. "I can't keep doing this alone." The words escaped before she could stop them. The nurse's expression softened immediately. "You shouldn't have had to." That honesty hurt and comforted her at the same time. Outside the room, nurses moved quickly between patient rooms, while overhead speakers called another doctor upstairs. Somebody somewhere dropped metal equipment, with a loud crash followed by annoyed voices. The hospital never truly slept. Sarah leaned back against the pillows while sweat clung to the side of her neck. Her body felt weak now. Every contraction seemed to drain something from her emotionally, too. She stared at her phone again. Still nothing. No missed calls, no text messages, no husband. At some point during the night, anger had faded into something worse, acceptance. And acceptance felt cold. The older nurse adjusted Sarah's blanket carefully. "You got a name picked out yet?" Sarah blinked slowly. "For the baby? Unless you secretly naming hospital equipment now." That pulled the smallest smile from her. "We talked about names for months." Her smile faded again. "Now, I don't even know if I want to use the one we picked." The nurse nodded quietly. "That makes sense." Sarah swallowed hard. "I keep hearing his voice every time I look at the crib stuff." Another contraction tightened sharply before she could continue speaking. Her fingers curled around the bed rail instantly. The nurse moved beside her again. "Come on. Focus on me." Sarah tried breathing through the pain. Inhale. Exhale. Another sharp wave. Her face twisted while tears filled her eyes again. "I hate him right now." The confession came out breathlessly. The nurse nodded once. "You allowed to?" "I still want him to walk through that door." Another breath. "And I hate myself for that too." That moment stayed suspended between them quietly, because heartbreak became confusing when love hadn't fully disappeared yet. The contraction finally eased enough for Sarah to relax slightly against the bed again. The nurse handed her water carefully. "You know what your problem is?" Sarah looked exhausted already. "What?" "You keep thinking love means enduring pain quietly." Sarah stared at her. The older woman shrugged. "Somebody should have taught you sooner that peace matters too." Before Sarah could respond, another nurse appeared briefly at the doorway. "Room 12 needs help." The older nurse sighed dramatically toward the ceiling. "Of course they do." She looked back at Sarah immediately. "I'll be right outside, okay?" Sarah nodded weakly. The nurse pointed 2 fingers toward her. "And don't you go having this baby while I'm gone. I ain't missing all the excitement." Despite everything, Sarah laughed softly. Then the nurse disappeared into the hallway. The room became quiet again, not peaceful, just empty. Sarah rested one trembling hand against her stomach while trying to steady her breathing alone. Outside the room, hurried footsteps crossed the floor repeatedly. A newborn cried somewhere nearby. Machines beeped steadily. Voices echoed faintly from farther down the corridor. The world kept moving while she sat trapped inside one painful moment after another. Then her phone vibrated suddenly. Her heart jumped instantly. She grabbed it fast enough to almost drop it. One message. Unknown number again. Final notice. Vehicle subject to impound fees. Sarah stared at the screen for several seconds before letting out a weak, disbelieving laugh. Of course, even the parking garage was abandoning her tonight. Fresh tears slipped down her face again before she wiped them away angrily. Another contraction hit hard enough to force a cry from her throat. She bent forward instantly, gripping the rail with both hands while panic rushed through her chest. No. No. The pain felt different this time. Sharper, heavier. Fear climbed into her breathing immediately. She reached for the call button with shaking fingers. Nobody answered yet. Outside, voices continued rushing through the hallway. Too much movement, too much chaos. Sarah's breathing turned uneven again. "I can't." The next contraction slammed into her before she finished speaking. Her chest tightened violently. For one terrifying second, she genuinely thought she might pass out. Then came footsteps outside the room. Fast, purposeful. A man in a dark coat walked through the hallway, with his phone pressed against one ear. "No," he said firmly into the call. "Move the meeting to Monday. I'm not discussing this again tonight." His voice carried the calm exhaustion of somebody used to solving problems constantly. He barely looked toward room 7 at first. Then he heard her cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken. He slowed down immediately. Inside the room, Sarah squeezed her eyes shut while trying desperately to breathe through another contraction. The call button still blinked, unanswered beside her bed. The man glanced briefly down the hallway, where overwhelmed nurses hurried between rooms, then back toward room 7. Something about the sight stopped him completely. A pregnant woman, alone, crying, no family beside her, no husband, just fear. The older nurse suddenly appeared from another room carrying medical charts against her chest. The moment she saw Sarah struggling alone, her face tightened. "Oh, Lord." She looked directly at the man standing near the doorway. "You." He blinked once. "Me." "Yes, you." Tall, stressed, expensive coat. "Get in here." He looked mildly confused, but stepped inside anyway. The nurse pointed toward Sarah quickly. "I need 30 seconds to grab the doctor. Stay with her." Before he could answer, she disappeared again. Now the room felt strangely still. Sarah opened her eyes briefly through tears and realized a stranger was standing beside her bed. Embarrassment crossed her face instantly. "I'm sorry," she whispered weakly. He frowned slightly. "For what?" "For being." She gestured helplessly around herself. "This." He glanced once toward the empty chair. That explained enough. Another contraction hit before she could look away again. Her fingers tightened painfully around the rail. Her breathing started breaking apart again. The stranger stepped closer, carefully. Not too close, just enough. "Hey." She tried inhaling slowly, but panic kept interrupting every breath. Tears rolled sideways into her hair. "I can't do this by myself." His expression changed slightly after hearing that. Not pity, something quieter, something human. He moved beside the bed slowly before crouching slightly near her line of sight. "Look at me." Sarah tried focusing. Barely. The room blurred around the edges from exhaustion. Then she felt his hand gently covering hers against the rail. Warm, steady, unexpectedly calm. "Hey," he said softly. "Breathe. You're not alone." For the first time all night, her body loosened slightly, instead of fighting everything around it. Not because the pain disappeared, not because her situation changed, but because somebody stayed when leaving would have been easier. Her trembling fingers slowly tightened around his hand. He didn't pull away. Another contraction came. This time, he stayed right there beside her through it. "Good," he said quietly while she fought for breath. "That's it. Slow down. You're doing okay." Nobody had said that to her tonight, not once, and somehow hearing it from a stranger made her cry harder. The older nurse returned moments later, with another doctor rushing behind her. "There we go," the nurse said quickly. "Mama, stay with us now." The room suddenly filled with movement again. Medical gloves snapping into place. Instructions, equipment, rolling closer. The doctor checking monitors. But through all of it, one thing remained steady. That hand. Sarah held onto it instinctively, while another contraction tore through her body. The stranger stayed calm beside her. "You're okay." Another breath. "You're doing fine." Another push. "I'm right here." Hours later, after pain, exhaustion, tears, fear, and finally relief, the room became quiet again. A newborn cry filled the air. Small, strong, alive. Sarah barely had enough energy left to lift her head. The older nurse smiled warmly while adjusting blankets around her. "You did good, baby." Sarah's eyes drifted sideways weakly. The stranger still sat beside the bed, still there. Her fingers remained loosely wrapped around his hand while exhaustion slowly pulled her under. And before sleep finally took her for a few brief moments, she realized something that scared her almost as much as being abandoned earlier that night. A complete stranger had made her feel safer than her own husband ever did. Morning arrived slowly through the hospital windows. Soft gray light spread across the maternity floor while exhausted nurses traded shifts near the front desk. Somewhere down the hallway, a newborn cried loudly before being soothed almost immediately by a tired mother humming under her breath. Inside room 7, Sarah woke gradually beneath a heavy blanket with dry lips and aching muscles. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then soreness pulled her back into reality. The hospital room, the labor, the empty chair, her husband leaving, and somehow the stranger who stayed. Her eyes moved slowly across the room. The bassinet stood beside her bed. The baby slept peacefully inside, wrapped tightly beneath a pink hospital blanket. A tiny hand rested near her cheek. Sarah stared quietly for a long moment. Emotion caught in her throat instantly. Not dramatic, just deep. The kind that sat silently in a person's chest. "You got your mama stressing already," she whispered softly. The baby shifted slightly in her sleep. A quiet knock interrupted the moment before the older nurse stepped inside, carrying a clipboard and 2 tiny cartons of milk balanced against paperwork. "There, my girls." Sarah blinked slowly. What time is it? Too early for nonsense. The nurse pulled the curtains open wider. Hospital breakfast coming soon, so prepare yourself emotionally. Sarah groaned weakly. That bad? Baby prison food got confidence. Hospital food got prayers. That pulled the faintest smile from her. The older nurse noticed immediately. See? Color coming back already. Sarah carefully pushed herself upright against the pillows while trying not to wince from soreness. The nurse adjusted the bassinet slightly closer to the bed. You sleep okay? A little? Sarah hesitated briefly. Then quietly, was he? She stopped herself. The nurse already knew who she meant. No sign of him. The answer came gently. Still painful, though. Sarah nodded once and looked down at the blanket over her legs. That hurt. Differently this morning. Less shocking. More humiliating. Like daylight had confirmed what fear already knew during the night. The nurse changed the subject carefully. Well, good news is your baby healthy, loud, and already judging everybody. Sarah laughed softly through her nose. Sounds accurate? A soft knock came from the doorway again. Both women looked up. Alex stood there, holding 2 coffee cups awkwardly in one hand and a brown paper bag in the other. For a second, Sarah looked genuinely confused, like she wasn't fully sure he was real outside last night's exhaustion. The older nurse smiled immediately. Well, look, who remembered room 7. Alex lifted the bag slightly. The cafeteria lady threatened me if I brought coffee without food. Smart woman, the nurse replied. Sarah pushed loose hair behind her ear quickly, suddenly aware of how tired she looked. Alex noticed the movement immediately and looked away respectfully to give her space. No staring, no awkward charm, no unnecessary comments. Just calm. Morning, he said softly. Her voice came out quieter than intended. Morning. The nurse grabbed 1 coffee dramatically. If either of y'all ask for this back, I become violent. Alex smiled faintly. Understood. The nurse pointed toward the hallway. I'll go pretend paperwork matters. Once she left, the room became quiet again. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Sarah looked toward the paper bag. You didn't have to do that. I know. That answer caught her off guard slightly. Alex set the bag carefully on the small table beside her bed. Figured hospital eggs shouldn't be anybody's first meal after childbirth. That earned another tiny smile from her before she looked away again. You stayed. The words escaped before she planned them. Alex leaned lightly against the chair near the window. You looked scared. Simple answer. No performance attached to it. Sarah swallowed quietly. Most people in her life always explained kindness after doing it, like they needed recognition. Alex spoke about helping her like it was normal. That difference stayed with her immediately. The baby made a soft noise from the bassinet. Alex glanced over instinctively. She okay? Sarah nodded. Just noisy already. He stepped slightly closer to the bassinet, but kept respectful distance, like he didn't want to cross invisible boundaries. Sarah noticed that too. You can look, she said quietly. Alex hesitated briefly before peering down into the bassinet. For the first time since entering the room, his expression changed completely. Something softened, not dramatic, just human. She's tiny. That's what babies usually start as, Sarah replied dryly. That surprised a laugh out of him. A real one. Short, tired, honest. The moment settled naturally between them. No forced chemistry, just 2 exhausted people surviving a strange night. Then the door opened again. A younger nurse entered carrying forms and a tablet. Good morning, she said quickly. We just need signatures for discharge preparation and birth certificate processing. Sarah immediately looked overwhelmed. The nurse kept talking. Insurance confirmation here. Emergency contact here. Pediatric acknowledgement here. Wait. Sarah interrupted softly. Can you slow down? The younger nurse paused. Oh, sorry. She started explaining again, but the stack of paperwork already looked impossible through Sarah's exhaustion. Alex quietly stepped closer. Want me to organize them? Sarah looked embarrassed immediately. No, it's okay. You just had a baby. That sentence carried no judgment, only practicality. The younger nurse handed him the forms instinctively. Honestly, if you can sort these in order, you'd be saving me too. Alex sat calmly beside the tray table and started arranging papers carefully into stacks. Insurance, medical release, birth registration. Sarah watched him silently for a moment. There was something strangely calming about how steady he remained. No frustration, no sighing, no making her feel incompetent. He simply helped. The younger nurse pointed toward one page. Signature there. Sarah reached for the pen slowly before pausing. Emergency contact. The line sat blank. Her chest tightened immediately. Alex noticed her hesitation, but said nothing. That restraint mattered. The younger nurse looked between them awkwardly. You can update it later if needed. Sarah nodded quickly and signed the page anyway. The room became quiet again after the nurse left. Alex continued organizing paperwork neatly. You do this often? Sarah asked. Paperwork? Helping strangers survive bureaucracy. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I've had practice. With hospitals? With messes. That answer stayed with her longer than expected. The baby stirred again with a tiny cry. Sarah instinctively tried reaching for the bassinet too quickly and winced immediately. Alex stood at once. What do you need? I'm okay. You made that face. What face? The painful one people make before pretending they're fine. Sarah stared at him briefly, then laughed softly, despite herself. You observant? Unfortunately. Without another word, he carefully rolled the bassinet closer so she wouldn't strain herself reaching. That tiny gesture nearly affected her more than the larger ones, because it felt thoughtful, natural, present. Sarah lifted the baby gently into her arms while exhaustion softened her posture again. Alex quietly returned to organizing paperwork like helping her had never been a big moment. That calm steadiness continued unsettling her emotionally, not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. Most people arrived loudly in her life. Promises, excuses, big emotions. Alex simply stayed useful. The older nurse returned moments later and looked between them knowingly. Well now, she said dramatically, look at this peaceful little family meeting. Sarah nearly choked instantly. I didn't ask questions, the nurse interrupted. Alex hid a smile behind his coffee cup. The nurse pointed accusingly toward him. You, helpful man, keep acting right. Yes, ma'am. She nodded approvingly. Good answer. Sarah shook her head while fighting another smile. The older nurse walked toward the door again before pausing. Oh, and room 7? Sarah looked up. Your baby cute enough to charge taxes. Then she disappeared again. The silence afterward felt lighter this time. Sarah adjusted the baby carefully in her arms before finally looking toward Alex fully. For a long moment, she simply studied him, the stranger who held her hand through the worst night of her life. The man still sitting here the next morning organizing hospital paperwork like leaving never crossed his mind. Her voice came quietly, carefully, almost cautious. Why are you still here? Alex looked up from the paperwork slowly after her question. For a second, he didn't answer immediately, not because he seemed uncomfortable, because he appeared to actually think about it. Sarah noticed that. Most people answered quickly when they lied. You looked like you needed somebody to stay, he finally said. Simple, direct, no performance. Sarah lowered her eyes toward the baby resting quietly in her arms. That answer should not have affected her as much as it did, but it did, because he said it like staying was ordinary, like compassion didn't require an announcement. The older nurse re-entered carrying another stack of towels before speaking loudly enough to interrupt the growing silence. All right now, everybody looking emotional in here. We not starting daytime crying already? Sarah laughed softly, while wiping beneath one eye quickly. The nurse pointed toward Alex. You eat yet? He shook his head once. No, you too rich-looking to skip breakfast. Sarah glanced toward him instinctively. Rich-looking? Alex barely reacted. I'm surviving. The nurse muttered. That coat cost more than my first apartment. Sarah looked between them suspiciously. Alex calmly took another sip of coffee. The nurse smirked before leaving again. You know, Sarah said carefully, after a moment, she might actually interrogate you before discharge. She already threatened me twice. That means she likes you. That concerning? A little. For the first time since the night before, the room felt almost normal. Not happy exactly, but less heavy. The baby shifted slightly in Sarah's arms before making a tiny frustrated sound. Alex looked toward the bassinet nearby. She hungry? Sarah nodded tiredly. Probably. She carefully adjusted the blanket while trying not to wince from soreness again. Alex noticed immediately. You need anything? I'm okay. You keep saying that. She looked up briefly. What am I supposed to say? The truth works. That answer caught her off guard again. Not because it sounded harsh, because it sounded calm, like honesty didn't frighten him. Sarah leaned back against the pillows slowly. The truth is, I feel like I got hit by a truck. Reasonable, and I smell terrible. I spent the night in a hospital chair. We all suffering. That pulled another laugh from her. A genuine one this time. Not forced. Not tiny. Real. The sound surprised both of them slightly. She noticed his expression soften afterward. Not flirtatious, just relieved. Like hearing her laugh mattered more than he expected. A knock interrupted the moment, before another nurse stepped inside, holding paperwork against her chest. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Lab needs confirmation signatures, too." Sarah stared at the forms immediately. "Oh my God." The nurse offered an apologetic smile. "Hospital rules." Alex held out his hand automatically. "I'll sort them." The nurse handed everything over without hesitation. "Honestly, thank you." Once she left again, Sarah shook her head slowly. "You're weirdly good at this." "Paperwork?" Being calm, Alex sat back slightly in the chair beside the bed. "That's usually code for emotionally unavailable." She blinked once before laughing softly again. "Well, maybe a little." He accepted that, without offense. The room settled into quieter conversation afterward. Not rushed, not intense. Just tired honesty between two people who hadn't planned to know each other. Eventually, Sarah looked toward the clock near the wall. "You've really been here all night." "You got work?" "Yes." "You ignoring it?" "For now." She studied him carefully for a second. "You important or something?" His mouth twitched faintly, like he almost smiled. "Depends who you ask." "That sounds suspicious." "It probably is." The baby started fussing louder suddenly. Sarah shifted carefully, trying to soothe her while exhaustion dragged at her shoulders again. Alex stood instinctively. "What can I do?" "You really don't have to keep helping." "I know." Again, that same answer. No pressure attached to it. No guilt. Just choice. Sarah looked down at the baby quietly. That difference kept affecting her more than she wanted, because her husband used to make kindness feel transactional. Everything came with frustration, eventually. Alex helped, like breathing. No resentment. No performance afterward. The older nurse returned again, carrying fresh water cups. She stopped mid-step, after seeing Alex holding burp cloths awkwardly. "Oh, Lord," she said dramatically. "Now, look at him. He out here training already." Sarah laughed immediately. Alex looked mildly alarmed. "I'm holding fabric." That's how it starts." The nurse placed fresh water beside Sarah, before narrowing her eyes toward Alex. "You got children?" "No." "Good. 'Cause the way you holding that cloth tells me babies would run your household immediately." Sarah covered her mouth laughing. Alex sighed quietly. "I'm being attacked before breakfast. You surviving, though." The nurse pointed towards Sarah proudly. "See?" She laughing now. "I deserve a raise." After she left again, the room stayed lighter. Sarah adjusted the baby against her shoulder carefully before speaking again. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I don't usually talk this much to strangers." Alex leaned back slightly in the chair. "Hospital exhaustion lowers defenses." "Is that your professional opinion?" "No. Just observation." Sarah smiled faintly. "You observe everything." You noticed that tiny exchange lingered between them quietly. Not romantic, just comfortable. Comfort itself felt unusual to Sarah now, especially after months of tension at home. No walking on eggshells. No trying to predict somebody's mood. No apologizing for existing too loudly. Just calm. Eventually another nurse arrived to take the baby briefly for routine checks. Sarah's arms felt strangely empty the second the bassinet rolled out of the room. Her face changed immediately. Alex noticed. "She'll be back." "I know." But her voice still carried worry. He nodded toward the door. "Want distraction?" Sarah looked tired already. "Depends. There's a cafeteria downstairs pretending to sell edible food." She snorted softly. "That bad?" One muffin looked personally offended by me. Another real laugh escaped her. The first genuine warmth reached her eyes this time. Alex noticed that too. A few minutes later, after confirming with the nurses that Sarah could leave the room briefly in a wheelchair, they slowly made their way downstairs. The hospital cafeteria sat mostly empty except for exhausted staff members and one sleeping security guard near the vending machines. Sarah looked around slowly. "This place feels depressing." Alex glanced toward a flickering drink machine. That machine definitely seen things. She laughed again while settling carefully into a chair near the window. The cafeteria worker handed them coffee and microwaved breakfast sandwiches with the emotional energy of somebody who no longer believed in mornings. Sarah stared down at the tray. You really stayed through labor just to let me die from cafeteria eggs? I'm building character. Through food poisoning? Exactly. For several minutes, they ate quietly, not awkwardly, just tired. Eventually, Sarah studied him across the table. You know what your problem is? That sounds dangerous. You answer questions without actually answering them. Alex took another sip of coffee calmly. Maybe I value mystery. You definitely sound rich. That surprised a quiet laugh out of him. What does rich sound like? I don't know. She gestured vaguely toward him. Calm. Expensive. Emotionally hydrated. Emotionally hydrated? Yeah. Like your credit score probably hugs people. Alex laughed harder this time before shaking his head. That might be the strangest sentence I've heard all year. Sarah smiled faintly while sipping her coffee. Then she looked toward his coat, draped across the chair beside him. You rich people always smell expensive. Alex glanced down at himself. That's hospital sanitizer and sleep deprivation. That line hit her at exactly the right moment. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, Sarah laughed fully. Not polite laughter, not exhausted survival laughter. A real laugh, warm, uncontrolled. Her shoulders shook slightly while she covered her mouth. Even nearby nurses looked over briefly. Alex watched her carefully for a second before smiling too. And somewhere between bad coffee, exhaustion, and shared silence, the worst night of Sarah's life stopped feeling quite so lonely anymore. By late afternoon, the hospital felt quieter than it had the night before. Not peaceful, just slower. The rush of emergency movement had eased into tired conversations, rolling carts, and muted television sounds drifting from patient rooms. Sarah sat near the window, holding her baby carefully against her chest, while soft sunlight stretched across the blanket in her lap. The exhaustion remained. So did the soreness. But emotionally, something had shifted after the cafeteria conversation. Not dramatically. She still felt embarrassed, still hurt, still angry whenever she remembered her husband leaving. But the panic had settled enough for her mind to breathe again. A soft knock sounded against the doorframe before Alex stepped back into the room carrying a small paper bag. Sarah looked up automatically. There it was again. That strange feeling of relief the second she saw him. It unsettled her a little. You disappeared, she said. I got threatened by emails. That serious? One message used the phrase, urgent disaster. He sat the bag on the counter. Turned out somebody scheduled a meeting twice. Sarah snorted softly. Corporate people, really dramatic, for no reason. You have no idea. He loosened the sleeves of his dark button-up shirt slightly, before glancing toward the baby. She'd been behaving? Sarah looked down at the tiny face resting against her chest. She screams like she pays bills. Impressive skill set already. A small smile crossed Sarah's face before she caught herself enjoying the conversation too much. That realization made her quieter again. Alex noticed the shift immediately. Noticing things seemed natural to him. You okay? She hesitated, then shrugged lightly. I don't know. Honest answer. Alex nodded once, like he respected that more than fake certainty. The room settled into silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable. The kind people didn't rush to fill. Sarah adjusted the baby's blanket carefully. I keep expecting him to call. Alex didn't interrupt, didn't rush to comfort her. He simply listened. That mattered. Every time my phone vibrates, she continued quietly. My stomach still drops. Alex leaned back slightly in the chair near the window. That doesn't disappear overnight. She looked toward him. You talk like you know. One side of his mouth lifted faintly. Everybody knows what disappointment feels like. The answer stayed vague enough to avoid attention shifting toward him, but Sarah noticed something underneath it anyway. Experience, not pity. That difference mattered too. The baby stirred slightly before making a soft sound against Sarah's chest. Alex instinctively lowered his voice. You picked a name yet? Sarah's expression softened immediately. I think so. You think so? I wanted it to feel right first. Alex nodded once toward the baby. Well? Sarah looked down quietly for a second before speaking. It fits her. He smiled faintly. That's a yes, then. Something about the simplicity of that moment settled warmly inside the room. No dramatic speeches, no emotional pressure, just conversation. Human, steady. The older nurse entered carrying fresh towels before stopping dramatically at the doorway. Well now, Look at y'all in here acting peaceful. Sarah laughed softly. We're literally sitting quietly. Exactly. Suspicious behavior. The nurse pointed toward Alex. You still here too? Yes, ma'am. She narrowed her eyes playfully. Either you extremely kind or avoiding responsibilities. Alex thought about it briefly. Both. The nurse laughed loudly. There we go. Honesty. She adjusted Sarah's blankets carefully before checking the baby. You finally eat something decent? Sarah nodded. He bullied me into cafeteria pancakes. The nurse gasped dramatically toward Alex. You feeding postpartum women hospital pancakes? Oh, you dangerous. They were edible. That's a strong accusation. Sarah laughed again quietly, while the nurse shook her head. You know, the older woman said while checking monitors, most men can't even survive one contraction secondhand. Alex looked toward Sarah. I believe that. The nurse pointed proudly. See? Smart man. After another few minutes of teasing and checking vitals, the nurse finally headed toward the door again. Before leaving, she paused briefly. You need anything, Holler, except emotional drama. My shift almost over. Once she disappeared, the room became quieter again. Sarah looked toward Alex carefully. You really stayed all day? You don't seem like somebody with free time. That an insult? It's observation. He smiled faintly again. There it was, that restrained humor. Never too loud, never trying too hard. Sarah noticed how different that felt compared to what she had grown used to over the years. Her husband always filled silence with noise, complaints, defensiveness, distractions. Alex seemed comfortable, simply existing beside another person. That calmness kept disarming her emotionally. The baby started fussing softly again. Sarah shifted carefully while trying to soothe her, but exhaustion pulled at her movements. You want help? Alex asked. With what? I don't know. Babies seem complicated. Sarah laughed softly. That's not confidence. I negotiated billion-dollar contracts last month. She blinked immediately. What? Alex paused, realized what he said, then casually reached for the diaper bag. Instead, nothing. Sarah stared at him suspiciously. Wait, he looked mildly trapped already. Did you say billion-dollar contracts? I might have exaggerated. You absolutely did not say that casually. Alex sighed quietly. That sounds worse out loud. Sarah studied him carefully now. The expensive coat, the calmness, the constant phone calls, the way hospital staff unconsciously treated him politely without fully realizing why. Pieces started connecting slowly in her head. What do you actually do? He hesitated briefly before answering. I run a company. What kind of company? Technology. That sounds expensive. It can be. Sarah leaned back slowly against the pillows. You seriously stayed in a maternity ward after business calls and meetings. I was already here. That's not an explanation. Alex looked toward the window briefly before answering. My mother used to say leaving people alone during hard moments changes you permanently. Sarah's expression softened slightly. She sounds wise. She was. The room quieted again after that. Not sad. Reflective. Sarah watched him differently now. Not because of money. Honestly, that part barely registered emotionally yet. What stayed with her more was this. A man with every excuse to leave didn't. That mattered, especially after the kind of night she survived. Eventually the baby settled asleep again, while Sarah relaxed deeper against the pillows. Exhaustion slowly softened her posture. Alex noticed immediately. You should rest. I already slept. You passed out for 37 minutes. You counted? The nurse announced it, like a medical achievement. That earned another laugh from her. Then silence settled comfortably again. Sarah looked toward him carefully. You know what's strange? What? I don't feel nervous around you. The confession surprised both of them slightly. Alex stayed quiet. She continued slowly. That should probably concern me. Probably. But it doesn't. For a moment, neither of them spoke, because some truths sounded louder after being admitted quietly. The baby shifted softly in her sleep again. Sarah rested one hand protectively against the blanket, covering her daughter. Then she looked toward Alex once more, and that was when she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to notice earlier. Every time he entered the room, her body stopped bracing for disappointment. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, trying to decide whether she regretted agreeing to this. Outside the small Dallas apartment, Car doors slammed one after another, while loud voices floated through the parking lot below. Her family had arrived from Houston, which meant peace officially no longer existed. The baby stirred softly against Sarah's shoulder, while gospel music already drifted through the apartment walls from somebody carrying a speaker upstairs. She closed her eyes briefly. Lord help me. A knock sounded at the front door, immediately followed by shouting, "We know you in there." Sarah laughed, despite herself. Only her family knocked like they were executing a police raid. Another voice followed instantly. "If she don't open this door, I'm using my key." Sarah carefully adjusted the baby against her chest before opening the door. The apartment exploded with noise immediately. "There, my baby. Move before you knock something over. Who parked behind my car? You always complaining." Arms wrapped around Sarah carefully, while voices overlapped each other in every direction at once. Warm perfume, loud laughter. Plastic food containers balanced dangerously in people's hands. The apartment filled with life within seconds. Sarah nearly cried from the sudden wave of familiarity alone. One older woman grabbed her face gently between both hands. "Look at you. I look tired. You look blessed and tired." That sounds accurate. The baby instantly became community property. Everybody wanted to hold her. Everybody claimed she looked like somebody else. One person insisted she had Sarah's nose. Another swore she looked exactly like that useless man, unfortunately. Sarah tried not reacting to that comment, but somebody noticed anyway. Family always noticed. The older woman's expression softened immediately. "We ain't saying his name in here today." Sarah nodded quietly. The apartment kept growing louder. Containers opened across the kitchen counter. Fried chicken, macaroni, cornbread. Somebody started singing along badly to the gospel music playing from a speaker near the couch. The baby woke up crying from all the noise before immediately being passed between comforting arms. For the first time since leaving the hospital, Sarah didn't feel alone carrying everything emotionally. Overwhelmed, yes, but not alone. A sharp knock interrupted the chaos. Everybody looked toward the door. Sarah froze slightly because she already knew who it was. One relative narrowed their eyes immediately. "You expecting somebody?" Sarah hesitated. "A friend." That word sounded suspicious, even to her. The room quieted slightly as she crossed toward the door. When she opened it, Alex stood outside holding 2 diaper boxes awkwardly against one arm and a baby store bag in the other. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet behind her. Alex noticed instantly. "I can come back later." Before Sarah could answer, voices exploded behind her again. "Well, who is that? Oh, he handsome? Move so we can see." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "Here we go." Alex stepped inside carefully, while every pair of eyes in the apartment immediately locked onto him. The contrast felt obvious instantly. Alex arrived dressed neatly in dark jeans and a fitted sweater, while the apartment smelled like cooking grease, baby lotion, and loud family energy. He looked like somebody used to quieter rooms, more controlled rooms. The baby immediately started crying again. One relative bounced her gently while staring directly at Alex like a detective preparing interrogation notes. Sarah cleared her throat. "Everybody. This is Alex." Several greetings overlapped at once. Alex nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." One older aunt folded her arms immediately. There it was. The suspicion. Sarah recognized that tone instantly. Alex seemed to recognize it too, but he stayed calm. Always calm. "I brought diapers," he said, lifting the boxes slightly. One cousin took the box from him, while still studying him carefully. "Expensive diapers, too." Alex blinked once. "There's cheap diapers?" That unexpectedly pulled laughter from half the room. The tension loosened slightly. The older aunt still looked unconvinced. Sarah stepped toward the kitchen quickly before things became uncomfortable too fast. "You hungry?" she asked Alex. One cousin answered. Before he could, "He better be. We cooked enough food to feed a church." Alex glanced toward the crowded kitchen. "That explains the smell." "Good smell or dangerous smell?" somebody asked immediately. "Good," he answered quickly. "Smart decision." The apartment gradually returned to movement again, while Alex remained near the doorway looking slightly unsure where to stand. Sarah noticed immediately. "You can sit," she told him quietly. He nodded once before carefully sitting near the couch, while relatives continued openly observing him from every direction. One protective cousin dropped into the chair across from him without warning. "So how you know Sarah?" "Straight to business." Sarah nearly choked on her drink already. Alex answered calmly. We met at the hospital. The cousin raised one eyebrow. That all? Sarah jumped in quickly. He helped me after delivery. Another pause. The cousin leaned back slowly. You stayed? Alex nodded once. That answer shifted the room slightly. Not enough to create trust, but enough to create curiosity. The older aunt still watched him carefully while fixing plates in the kitchen. Sarah noticed every glance. So did Alex, probably. Yet he never became defensive. That mattered. Eventually, somebody pulled out cards near the dining table. Come on, one cousin shouted toward Alex. You playing? Alex looked mildly concerned already. I don't know the rules. That's perfect. Easier to beat you. Sarah laughed softly from the couch, while rocking the baby gently. The card game turned into complete chaos. Within minutes, everybody talked over each other. Accusations started immediately. You cheating? How I cheat with these cards? You got the face of a liar. Alex tried following the rules for several rounds before realizing nobody else followed them consistently either. This game changes every 5 minutes, he finally said. That's family tradition, somebody answered proudly. At one point, Alex placed the wrong card down confidently enough that the entire table exploded with yelling. Oh, he lost. That man, confused. Somebody save him. Alex leaned back in defeat, while laughter filled the apartment around him. Sarah watched quietly from across the room, and for the first time since introducing him to her family, she noticed something important. Alex looked uncomfortable sometimes, overwhelmed too, but he never acted above any of it, never mocked the noise, never criticized the chaos, never tried controlling the room. He simply adjusted patiently, respectfully. That stayed with her deeply, especially because she knew men who treated warmth like inconvenience. Hours later, while family voices continued bouncing through the apartment and gospel music played softly in the background, Sarah looked toward Alex sitting at the crowded table, holding terrible cards and surviving aggressive family trash talk with surprising patience. And quietly, she realized he was trying much harder than most people ever would. By early evening, the apartment had reached full family volume. Nobody used indoor voices anymore. Not around food, not around cards, not around babies. Sarah sat curled into the corner of the couch with the baby sleeping against her chest, while conversations bounced loudly between the kitchen and dining table. Somebody argued passionately about football. Somebody else complained about traffic in Houston. One cousin kept accusing another of burning the cornbread on purpose, out of jealousy. The entire apartment smelled like fried food, cinnamon candles, and baby lotion. And somehow, Alex was still there. That alone surprised Sarah a little. Most people outside her family circle usually found gatherings like this exhausting after an hour. Alex had survived nearly 6, not comfortably, but respectfully. That mattered. At the dining table, one cousin shuffled cards aggressively while staring at Alex. You smiling too calm for somebody losing this bad. Alex glanced down at his terrible hand. I accepted my fate 20 minutes ago. That's because you don't know how to play. I've noticed. Laughter spread around the table again. Sarah shook her head quietly while adjusting the baby's blanket. The older aunt emerged from the kitchen carrying sweet tea before narrowing her eyes toward Alex again. You always this patient? Alex looked up politely. I try to be. That answer clearly did not satisfy her. Sarah noticed the tension immediately. Her aunt had been studying Alex all afternoon, like she expected him to eventually expose some hidden problem. And honestly, Sarah understood why. Men who entered loudly usually left loudly too. Her family had seen enough disappointment already. One cousin suddenly leaned toward Alex across the table. So what exactly you do for work? Sarah looked up immediately. There it is. Alex stayed calm. I work in tech. The cousin frowned. What? I manage a company. What kind of company? Alex hesitated briefly. Sarah recognized the pause instantly, not because he wanted to lie, because he clearly hated talking about himself. A software company. One cousin blinked, slowly. Like apps? Y'all hear this? The cousin shouted dramatically toward the kitchen. That man out here, building Facebook. Alex rubbed his forehead quietly. It's not Facebook. The older aunt crossed her arms. So you got money. Straight to it. The room grew quieter after that question, not silent, but attentive. Alex answered honestly, I do okay. One cousin nearly choked on sweet tea. Man dressed like a luxury car commercial talking about, okay, that pulled a few laughs from the room. The older aunt didn't laugh. She continued studying him carefully. Sarah felt tension building immediately, not because of Alex, because she already knew what wealth meant to her family sometimes. Distance, control, disappearing, once life became inconvenient. The older aunt finally spoke again. You helping Sarah financially? Sarah straightened instantly. Auntie, I asked a question. Alex answered before Sarah could grow defensive. I help where I can. The older woman nodded slowly. That sound carried years of suspicion inside it. Sarah knew that tone. The room shifted uncomfortably. One cousin tried lightening the mood immediately. Well, if he rich, tell him buy us all houses. Alex surprised everybody by answering calmly. Houses expensive. That means yes, the cousin shouted. Laughter broke some tension again, but not all of it. The older aunt remained quiet for several seconds before speaking carefully. Men with money usually think helping means owning. The room settled after that sentence. Nobody interrupted, because everybody understood what she really meant. Sarah felt her chest tighten instantly. Auntie, I'm serious. Alex leaned back slightly in his chair. I understand the concern. That answer surprised the room. No defensiveness, no offended pride, just calm. The older aunt narrowed her eyes further. You do? Yes. She crossed her arms tighter. Explain. Sarah almost stopped the conversation right there, but Alex spoke first. People with money sometimes use generosity to create obligation. He shrugged lightly. I've seen it happen. The room grew noticeably quieter now, because that answer sounded honest, not rehearsed. One cousin tilted his head slightly. So what you want from Sarah, then? That question landed heavily. Sarah looked toward Alex immediately, not because she feared the answer, because she suddenly realized she didn't actually know. Alex looked across the room toward her first, before answering. Nothing. The cousin frowned. You expect us to believe that? Alex remained steady. She needed support. That's it? That's enough. For a second, nobody spoke. Sarah looked down at the sleeping baby against her chest, because emotion suddenly tightened unexpectedly inside her throat. The older aunt still looked unconvinced, though. Rich men always nice in the beginning. Sarah finally sat up straighter. Okay, that's enough. The room shifted immediately, because Sarah rarely used that tone with family. Her aunt looked toward her calmly. I'm protecting you. I know. You just had a baby with a man who disappeared. Sarah swallowed hard. That hurt, because it was true. The older woman softened slightly after seeing Sarah's face. I don't want you falling into another situation where somebody makes promises they don't plan to keep. Alex spoke quietly before Sarah could respond. She has every right to be cautious. That answer diffused the tension more than arguing would have. The older aunt studied him carefully again, still suspicious, but listening now. One cousin broke the heaviness intentionally by pointing toward Alex. Well, if he lying, at least he polite. That pulled laughter from the room again. Even Sarah smiled weakly. The conversation gradually shifted afterward toward lighter topics. Music, family stories, baby names. But the emotional temperature had changed, because now everybody understood something clearly. Alex wasn't just some random stranger from the hospital anymore. He came from a completely different world, and that reality created distance whether anybody wanted it to or not. Later that night, after plates were cleaned and relatives slowly scattered around the apartment talking in smaller groups, Sarah stepped quietly onto the small balcony for fresh air. The city lights stretched across Dallas, while traffic hummed softly below. Inside, family laughter still echoed through the apartment. The balcony door slid open behind her. Alex stepped outside holding 2 bottled water. You disappeared, he said. I needed oxygen. He handed her a bottle quietly. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Sarah sighed softly. I'm sorry about earlier. Alex leaned lightly against the railing. You don't owe me an apology. My family can be intense. One cousin threatened to spiritually evaluate me. That means she likes you a little. That concerning? Sarah laughed softly. There it is again. What? You always stay calm. Alex looked out toward the city lights. Not always. You hide stress well. That's different. The answers stayed with her. Sarah twisted the bottle cap slowly between her fingers. You could have left earlier. But you didn't. No. Why? Alex glanced toward her briefly. You wanted honesty earlier, right? She nodded slowly. He looked back toward the city before answering. Because this apartment feels more real than most rooms I spend time in. That caught her off guard. What does that mean? He thought about the answer before speaking again. Nobody here seems interested in pretending. Sarah smiled faintly. Oh, trust me. My family lost the ability to pretend around 1998. That earned a quiet laugh from him. The balcony settled into comfortable silence again. Then voices drifted through the cracked balcony door behind them. Family voices, not quiet enough. The older aunt. And I'm telling you, men like him don't stay. Sarah froze instantly. Inside, another relative answered quietly. He been here this whole time, though. For now, the aunt replied. But men with money got options. They live different. Sarah's chest tightened. Not because she fully agreed, because part of her feared the same thing already. Inside the apartment, the conversation continued softly beyond the door. But Sarah stopped listening, because suddenly, the warmth she'd been feeling all evening carried uncertainty inside it too. 2 days later, Sarah stood in her aunt's backyard holding a paper plate, while somebody argued loudly over barbecue sauce near the grill. The Texas evening air carried smoke, music, laughter, and enough food to feed an entire church conference. String lights stretched across the backyard fence, while folding chairs filled slowly with relatives, neighbors, and people Sarah hadn't seen in years, but somehow still called family. A little girl ran past holding juice boxes like emergency supplies. Somebody's uncle had already started dancing too early. The cookout officially reached dangerous levels of energy. Sarah adjusted the baby carefully against her shoulder, while trying not to laugh at the chaos around her. Honestly, this felt more like home than anything had in months. Gospel music drifted softly from outdoor speakers before somebody switched suddenly to old-school R&B loud enough to shake the patio table. Immediate cheering followed. Oh, now we cooking. Who touched the playlist? Leave it right there. Sarah smiled quietly to herself while rocking the baby gently. Then she noticed Alex standing near the drink table looking completely lost while one cousin explained the importance of seasoning chicken with emotion. He listened seriously too. That made it funnier. Sarah walked over slowly. You surviving? Alex glanced toward the crowded backyard. Barely. You've been trapped beside the grill for 20 minutes. One man gave me a lecture about ribs. That sounds accurate. Alex lowered his voice slightly. I think I accidentally agreed to help somebody move next weekend. Sarah laughed immediately. Yeah, you officially family now. That sentence slipped out naturally. The moment it landed, both of them noticed it. Sarah looked away first. Alex stayed quiet, not awkward, just thoughtful. One cousin suddenly appeared carrying dominoes. There y'all are. Come sit down. I don't know how to play dominoes, Alex admitted. The cousin looked offended. What kind of childhood did you have? Alex thought about it, honestly. A quiet one. That answer lingered unexpectedly. Not sad, exactly, but different enough that Sarah noticed. The cousin shoved dominoes toward him anyway. Tonight, we fixing that. Within 10 minutes, Alex lost badly twice. By the third game, the entire table openly mocked him. You can't even count dots. He thinking too hard. That man calculating taxes instead of playing. Alex leaned back in defeat, while laughter exploded around the table again. Sarah watched from nearby while bouncing the baby gently. There was something strangely endearing about seeing him this uncomfortable yet still trying. Most men with pride problems would have checked out emotionally hours ago. Alex just kept adjusting quietly, learning, listening. Even when everybody laughed at him, one older relative handed him another plate of food. You too skinny to be rich. Alex blinked once. That feels medically inaccurate. More laughter. The evening settled warmer as sunset faded slowly behind the backyard fences. Music drifted through the air, while children chased each other near the patio lights. At one point, Sarah sat beside Alex beneath the string lights, while the baby finally slept peacefully in her arms. You know, she said softly, my family only teases people they accept. Alex glanced toward the domino table, where somebody still complained loudly about losing. That comforting? A little? He nodded thoughtfully. My family usually avoided loud conversations. Sarah looked toward him carefully. What was that like? Alex rested his elbows lightly against his knees. Quiet dinners. Quiet holidays. Quiet problems. No cookouts? No card games. That sounds depressing. A faint smile touched his face. It was organized. That's worse. He laughed softly under his breath. Sarah noticed how different his laughter sounded now, compared to the hospital. Looser, less guarded. That realization warmed something inside her unexpectedly. Music changed again near the speakers before several relatives shouted excitedly, "Oh, this my song." People immediately started dancing near the patio. One cousin grabbed Sarah's arm instantly. "Come on." Sarah laughed. "I got the baby. We got the baby." Before she could protest further, the baby was already being passed safely into another relative's arms. Alex watched the entire exchange like it happened too fast to understand. "That seems unsafe," he admitted. "We call it trust." One cousin pointed directly at him. "You too. Get up." Alex looked genuinely alarmed. "I don't dance. That's fine. Neither do half the people out there." Sarah laughed loudly. "Come on. It's just line dancing." That sentence feels dishonest. 5 minutes later, Alex stood awkwardly near the patio, while relatives shouted instructions from every direction. "Left. Know your other left." Why he moving like corporate paperwork? Sarah nearly cried laughing, watching him struggle. Alex looked toward her accusingly. "You're enjoying this too much." "A lot, actually." The music started again. Everybody moved together smoothly except Alex, who remained half a beat behind every step. At one point, he accidentally turned the wrong direction and almost collided with a folding chair. The entire backyard exploded laughing. Alex stopped dancing immediately. "I'm retiring." "Nope," Sarah said, grabbing his wrist lightly before he escaped. Again, the touch lasted maybe 2 seconds. Still, both noticed it. Sarah released him quickly. Something quieter settled between them afterward. Not uncomfortable, just aware. The music started again. This time Sarah stood beside him, guiding the steps slowly. "Okay," she said. "Watch me." "I am watching." "No, you're panicking." "That too." She laughed softly before stepping closer. "Relax your shoulder." He obeyed automatically. "Now, left." He moved left. "Good. Now turn." He turned too early again. Sarah burst out laughing, while grabbing his arm to steady herself. "You hopeless." "I'm trying." "I know." That answer came softer than intended. For one brief moment, the noise around them faded slightly. String lights glowed overhead while music carried through warm Texas air. Alex looked down at her. Sarah looked away first again, not because she wanted distance, because closeness suddenly felt dangerous, especially after how badly trusting the wrong person had already hurt her. The song ended moments later beneath cheering and laughter. Alex stepped back immediately. Respectful again, always respectful. That mattered more every day. Later that evening, after food containers stacked high near the kitchen door and relatives slowly settled into smaller conversations, Sarah found herself sitting beside Alex near the far corner of the backyard. The baby slept peacefully in a carrier beside them, while music played softer now. Exhaustion finally caught up to Sarah slowly. "You okay?" Alex asked quietly. You look tired. I gave birth 3 weeks ago." "Fair point." She smiled faintly before resting her head back against the chair. The warm night air felt calming. Voices blended softly nearby. Somebody laughed loudly near the grill again, and without fully realizing it, Sarah's head slowly tilted sideways against Alex's shoulder. The moment happened naturally. No dramatic pause, no sudden music, just exhaustion and comfort arriving at the same time. The second she realized it, she started pulling away immediately. "Sorry." "You're okay." Simple answer. No tension attached to it. Sarah hesitated briefly before relaxing again. "Just for a minute." Alex stayed completely still beside her, not taking advantage, not making the moment awkward. That restraint affected her deeply, because emotional safety still felt new. The backyard lights reflected softly across the quiet moment between them while laughter continued in the distance. And sitting there beneath warm Texas skies with her family nearby, and Sarah resting trustingly against his shoulder, Alex realized something that unsettled him more than he expected. He was no longer helping her out of kindness alone. Somewhere along the way, he had started falling for her. Rain tapped lightly against the apartment windows, while Sarah folded tiny baby clothes across the couch, one slow piece at a time. The apartment felt unusually quiet after the chaos of the cookout 2 nights earlier. No loud music, no relatives arguing over seasoning, no cousins threatening people during card games. Just soft rain, the hum of the dryer, and the occasional tiny sound from the baby monitor beside her. Honestly, the silence felt strange now. She finished folding another pink sleeper before glancing toward the unopened crib box sitting near the living room wall. Large, complicated, annoying. She had been avoiding it for 3 days, mostly because the instruction manual looked emotionally aggressive. A knock sounded at the door. Sarah already smiled before standing. That realization stopped her briefly because she recognized his knock now. Not loud, not impatient, just steady. She opened the door to find Alex holding coffee in one hand and a toolbox in the other. Sarah blinked once. "You brought weapons." Alex lifted the toolbox slightly. "I heard rumors somebody's been avoiding crib assembly. I'm waiting for divine intervention. I'm the budget version." That pulled a quiet laugh from her as he stepped inside. The baby monitor crackled softly from the couch table while Alex set the coffee down near her folded laundry. "You eat yet?" he asked. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "You always start conversations like somebody's checking survival conditions. You got a newborn. Survival conditions matter." Fair point. Alex looked toward the giant, unopened crib box near the wall. "That thing been sitting there since last week." She folded another blanket carefully. "It keeps judging me." "That's cardboard." "It's judgmental cardboard." He laughed softly under his breath before kneeling beside the box. The apartment carried that familiar calmness again. Once he settled into the room, no pressure, no performance, just presence. Sarah noticed herself relaxing automatically. That realization made her nervous lately, because comfort had become dangerous in her mind. Still, she sat quietly nearby while Alex opened the box carefully and pulled out wooden pieces one by one. A long silence passed naturally. Rain tapping outside, tools shifting against hardwood floors, tiny baby clothes folding into neat piles. Domestic, peaceful. The kind of moment Sarah once imagined marriage would feel like. That thought hurt unexpectedly. She looked away quickly before her expression changed too much. Alex noticed anyway. "You okay?" "Yeah." He studied her for half a second. "You did the thing again." "What thing?" "The pretending you're fine voice." Sarah sighed softly. "You really notice everything. Occupational hazard. You still never explained what that occupation actually involves." Alex tightened one screw carefully before answering. "Meetings, stress, too many emails." "That sounds miserable." "It pays well." Sarah smiled faintly. "There it is." "What?" "The rich person answer." Alex looked genuinely confused. "What's the non-rich answer?" "I don't know. Something emotional." He thought about it seriously. "It also distracts me." That answer surprised her slightly, not because it sounded dramatic, because it sounded honest. Before she could respond, a loud crack suddenly echoed through the apartment. Sarah jumped immediately. Alex stared down at the wooden crib piece in his hands. The piece had split completely. For 2 full seconds, silence filled the room. Then Sarah burst into laughter. Real laughter. The kind she tried holding back unsuccessfully. Alex looked mildly offended. "In my defense," he said calmly, "that wood lacked character. You broke the crib." It broke itself emotionally. Sarah laughed harder while covering her face. "Oh my God." Alex inspected the broken piece seriously. "This feels fixable." It literally snapped in half. That's not confidence. That's denial." The deadpan answer only made her laugh harder. The baby monitor crackled again beside them. Alex looked toward it immediately. "She awake?" Sarah nodded, while wiping tears of laughter from beneath her eyes. "Probably judging your construction skills." "That fair." She disappeared briefly into the bedroom before returning with the baby resting sleepily against her shoulder. Alex sat cross-legged beside the half-built crib, looking personally betrayed by the instruction manual. Sarah smiled, despite herself. "You losing a fight to furniture right now. These instructions written by angry people." She carefully sat beside him on the floor, while gently rocking the baby. For several minutes, they worked quietly together. Sarah handed him screws. Alex assembled pieces more carefully this time. The rain outside softened into a gentle rhythm against the windows. No tension, no loud emotions, just 2 tired people building something for a child. The simplicity of that moment settled deeply into Sarah's chest. Too deeply. That scared her a little. At one point, Alex leaned back from the crib and looked toward her. "You're staring. I'm supervising. You laughed when I failed. That's leadership." He shook his head quietly while smiling. Sarah noticed something then. He smiled more around her family, around the baby, around this apartment, less guarded than the man she first met in the hospital hallway. That realization stayed with her. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. Alex nodded once. "You ever think your life would end up like this?" He looked around the apartment briefly, covered in baby blankets and arguing with furniture. "Yeah." A faint smile touched his mouth again. "No." "Does it bother you?" He answered without hesitation. "No." Simple answer. Dangerously simple. Sarah looked down at the baby resting quietly against her chest. Her heart tightened unexpectedly, because part of her wanted to believe him completely already. That terrified her. The crib finally stood, finished near the window an hour later. Slightly crooked, but standing. Alex stepped back proudly. "Well," Sarah tilted her head critically. "That side, leaning. It's artistic. It's unstable. It builds character." She laughed softly, while walking toward the crib carefully. The baby blinked sleepily in her arms, while Sarah gently touched the finished wood frame. Something emotional moved through her, unexpectedly. Not because of the crib itself, because somebody stayed long enough to build it with her. That difference mattered more than she wanted to admit. Alex noticed her expression immediately. "What?" Sarah shook her head quickly. "Nothing. You got emotional quiet." "I do not." "You absolutely do." She smiled faintly, but didn't argue, because he was right. The room felt quieter afterward. The rain outside slowing. The apartment warm from dryer heat and soft lamplight. Alex began packing tools back into the toolbox, while Sarah stood near the crib holding the baby carefully against her shoulder. And suddenly, fear crept in. Sharp, unexpected. Not fear of Alex hurting her. Fear of needing him. That scared her more, because dependence had betrayed her once already. She watched him quietly while he organized screws and folded instruction papers carefully. Calm, reliable, present. Everything she once begged somebody else to become. Her chest tightened slowly, because she realized something dangerous was happening without permission. Peace around him was starting to feel normal, and Sarah no longer trusted anything that felt too good for too long. 3 days after the crib incident, Sarah started creating distance without fully meaning to. Not dramatic distance, small distance, quiet distance. The kind people created when fear arrived before they were ready to admit it. She answered Alex's texts slower, kept conversations shorter, stopped calling when the baby cried late at night, even when she wanted to, especially when she wanted to. At first, Alex didn't mention it. That somehow made everything harder, because most people demanded explanations the second her energy changed. Alex simply noticed, then adjusted quietly, which almost made her feel guiltier. Late Thursday afternoon, Sarah stood in the kitchen, warming a bottle, while exhaustion sat heavy beneath her eyes. The baby had cried most of the night. Her apartment looked lived in now. Baby blankets draped over chairs, tiny socks disappearing mysteriously, coffee cups everywhere. She barely recognized herself lately. Her phone buzzed softly against the counter. "Alex, need groceries?" Simple, no pressure attached. Sarah stared at the message longer than necessary before typing back, "I'm okay." 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then returned. "Alex, okay. Let me know if that changes." That was it. No guilt, no questioning. "No, you sure?" Just space. And somehow, that made her chest ache worse. She tossed the phone onto the couch afterward and leaned heavily against the kitchen counter. This was exactly how emotional dependence started. Quietly, safely. Until one day, somebody became part of your daily breathing pattern, and Sarah no longer trusted herself around that kind of comfort. The baby started fussing again from the living room. "I know," Sarah whispered tiredly, while grabbing the bottle. We both struggling. By evening, rain covered Dallas again. Soft thunder rolled somewhere far outside while Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor beside the couch folding laundry mechanically. The television played quietly in the background without her actually watching it. Her phone buzzed again. "Alex, left something outside your door." Before she could respond, another message appeared. "Alex, don't argue. You were out of coffee." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Of course, he noticed that too. She opened the apartment door carefully. 2 grocery bags sat neatly beside the welcome mat. Coffee, baby wipes, soup, fruit, even the specific crackers she liked from the hospital. Her throat tightened immediately, not because of the groceries, because attention like that felt dangerously intimate. She carried the bags inside slowly before sitting heavily on the couch again. The apartment suddenly felt too quiet, too emotional. The baby monitor crackled softly beside her. Her phone buzzed once more. Alex, no need to text back tonight. Rest. That did it. Tears filled her eyes instantly, not because she was sad, because kindness without pressure still confused her nervous system. Sarah wiped beneath her eyes quickly and looked around the apartment. The finished crib stood near the window, crooked slightly, still standing. That image hit her harder than expected, because the crib represented something she kept trying not to name: consistency. And consistency frightened her now. Her husband used to start strong too. Flowers, late-night conversations, support, plans, promises. Then life got heavier, and slowly everything changed. Sarah pressed both hands against her face briefly. No, she whispered to herself, because emotionally she could already feel herself leaning toward Alex more every week. That terrified her, not because he seemed unsafe, because he seemed safe enough to lose painfully later. The next afternoon, Alex stopped by the apartment after work, carrying takeout containers and a small stuffed elephant for the baby. Sarah opened the door carefully. You didn't have to keep bringing things. I know. That answer again. Always that answer. It never sounded manipulative. That made resisting him harder. Alex noticed immediately that something felt different. Not through words, through energy. Sarah stepped aside quietly to let him inside before returning toward the couch. No teasing tonight. No relaxed laughter. The apartment carried emotional distance immediately. Alex set the food down carefully without commenting on it. How was your day? He asked. Fine. Short answer. He noticed. How's she doing? He asked, nodding gently toward the baby sleeping nearby. Good. Another short answer. Alex removed his jacket slowly while studying her face. You want to tell me what's wrong? Sarah focused on folding another baby blanket. Nothing's wrong. He stayed quiet for several seconds, not pushing, just waiting. That patience nearly cracked her emotionally. Finally, she sighed heavily. You ever realize something good is happening? Alex listened carefully. And instead of enjoying it, you start preparing for it to disappear. The room became still after that. Rain tapped softly against the windows again, while Alex leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. That sounds exhausting. It is. Sarah folded the blanket tighter than necessary. I just don't understand why you're still here. Alex frowned slightly. We've talked about this. No. She looked up finally. We talked around it. That honesty shifted the room immediately. Sarah stood slowly and crossed her arms against herself. You barely know me. I know enough. That's the problem. Alex remained calm, always calm. You think because somebody stays through one difficult moment, they'll stay forever. That's not what I think, isn't it? Sarah looked away quickly after saying it, because the fear underneath her voice had become too obvious now. Alex answered quietly. I think people deserve support when life hurts. That sounds nice. It's true, for now. The second those words left her mouth, regret crossed her face. Because she wasn't trying to hurt him. She was trying to protect herself. Alex understood that immediately. That somehow made things worse, too. The baby stirred softly from the bassinet before settling again. The apartment stayed quiet, except for rain and breathing. Finally, Alex spoke carefully. Did somebody teach you love always leaves? Sarah's throat tightened instantly. My husband walked out while I was having his child. The pain inside that sentence filled the entire room. Alex nodded slowly. I know. No, you don't. Her voice cracked unexpectedly. You didn't sit there for months, watching somebody slowly stop loving you. Alex stayed silent. You didn't spend every day trying harder, while somebody else stopped trying at all. Her eyes filled again. You didn't feel stupid for defending them to everybody. The room became painfully honest after that. Sarah shook her head while wiping beneath one eye angrily. And now suddenly there's you. Alex looked toward her quietly. Me. You're kind all the time. She laughed bitterly through emotion. You notice everything. You help without making me beg for it. You show up. Her voice softened, and I don't know what to do with that. For the first time since entering the apartment, Alex looked emotionally affected too. Not defensive, not offended, just human. He crossed the room slowly, but stopped several feet away from her, respecting space. Always respecting space. You don't have to do anything with it. Sarah looked toward him through tears. That's not true. Another long silence stretched between them. Then Alex spoke softly. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. The sentence landed gently. No pressure, no emotional manipulation, just understanding. And somehow, that hurt Sarah's defenses more than promises ever could. The conversation from the night before stayed with Sarah longer than she expected, not because Alex said something dramatic, because he didn't. No promises, no speeches about forever, no wounded ego after she pushed him away emotionally, just patience. That unsettled her more than conflict would have. The next few days passed quietly. Alex still checked in, still brought groceries sometimes, still helped when she needed something heavy carried upstairs. But after their conversation, he became even more careful with space, and Sarah noticed immediately. No lingering touches, no sitting too close accidentally, no emotional pressure hiding behind kindness. He respected the line she created. That should have made her feel safer. Instead, she missed him. That realization irritated her deeply. Friday night arrived colder than expected. Rain covered the apartment windows again, while the baby finally slept after nearly an hour of fussing. Sarah stood near the kitchen sink, wearing one of Alex's old hoodies he accidentally left behind days earlier. At least, that's what she kept telling herself, accidentally. The hoodie smelled faintly like cedar and expensive laundry detergent, which honestly felt rude. Her phone buzzed softly on the counter. Alex, how's the tiny dictator tonight? Sarah smiled before she could stop herself. Better. Finally. Asleep. 3 dots appeared immediately. Alex, congratulations. You survived another battle. Sarah leaned against the counter while typing back. Barely. Several seconds passed. Then, Alex, you eat dinner? Sarah rolled her eyes automatically. There he go again. Eventually she typed, no. Almost instantly Alex opened the door. Sarah blinked once before walking toward the apartment entrance. When she opened it, Alex stood there holding takeout containers and looking slightly tired beneath the hallway light. You planned this? You say that like it's criminal. It might be. He handed her one of the bags carefully. You left your favorite soup at my place. My place? You know what I mean. Sarah stepped aside quietly to let him inside. The apartment carried that familiar warmth again within minutes, not because of romance, because his presence changed the emotional temperature of rooms. Alex removed his jacket slowly, while Sarah unpacked containers onto the kitchen counter. Smells expensive, she muttered. That's because you judge food financially now. I learned from you rich people. Alex shook his head while helping organize the container. You still think I'm secretly evil? I think you own unnecessary watches. That's fair. She laughed softly under her breath before handing him utensils. The baby monitor crackled faintly nearby. Both glanced toward it automatically, then toward each other. That small, synchronized movement settled strangely deep inside Sarah's chest, dangerously natural. They ate quietly at first while rain tapped softly against the windows. The television played low in the background without either paying attention. Eventually, Sarah looked toward him carefully. You know something weird? Usually, I don't feel anxious when you're here. Alex paused briefly with his drink, halfway lifted. That weird? For me? She nodded slowly. Yeah. The honesty shifted something in the room immediately. Alex set the drink down quietly. I'm glad. Simple answer. But Sarah noticed the emotion underneath it anyway. She looked down at her food again. I used to think relationships were supposed to feel exhausting. Alex frowned slightly. That sounds terrible. It was. The room settled into softer silence afterward. Not empty, thoughtful. Sarah rested both hands around her cup while staring toward the rain-covered windows. My husband used to apologize after hurting me, she said quietly. At first, I thought that meant he cared. Alex stayed silent. He'd disappoint me. She swallowed slowly, then become sweet again afterward. A bitter smile touched her mouth briefly. I confused emotional recovery with love. Alex leaned back carefully against the couch cushions. That happens more than people admit. Sarah looked toward him. How would you know? That question lingered between them for several seconds. Alex's expression shifted slightly, not closed off, more reflective. Finally, he answered quietly. My father cared more about appearances than people. Sarah listened carefully. He believed providing financially solved everything. Alex looked down briefly before continuing. Every conversation in our house felt professional. A pause. No yelling. No affection either. That explained something Sarah had been noticing for weeks. The restraint. The emotional control. The way Alex observed feelings before speaking into them. You lonely growing up? She asked softly. He smiled faintly, without humor. Quiet houses can feel lonely, even when full. The sentence settled heavily between them. Sarah suddenly understood him differently, not as a perfect man, as someone who learned emotional distance long before adulthood. That made his presence feel even more intentional now, because kindness didn't come naturally from environments like that. People usually repeated what they survived. Alex chose differently. Sarah looked down at her hands quietly. I'm scared of needing somebody again. The confession barely rose above a whisper. Alex answered just as softly. I know. No. I mean, really needing them. Her voice tightened slightly, the kind where their absence changes your entire day. The room became very still after that. Rain against glass, soft humming from the refrigerator, the baby monitor crackling faintly beside the couch. Real life continuing around vulnerable honesty. Alex looked toward her carefully. You know it scares me. Sarah blinked once. What? That I don't mind showing up anymore. Her chest tightened instantly, because she understood exactly what he meant somewhere along the way. Caring became automatic for both of them. Not dramatic, not obsessive, just steady, dangerously steady. Sarah laughed softly through nervous emotion. This feels unhealthy. Alex smiled faintly. Probably neither looked away. That tension had been growing quietly for weeks now. Not loud attraction. Something slower, more emotional, more frightening. Sarah's voice softened. You make peace feel normal. The words escaped before she could stop them. Alex stared at her for a second longer than usual. Then quietly, you make this apartment feel less empty. There it was. The first real truth sitting openly between them. No hiding behind humor this time. No distractions. Just honesty. Sarah looked down quickly because emotion rushed too hard into her chest all at once. She felt exposed, suddenly, seen, and strangely safe at the same time. Alex shifted slightly closer on the couch, not aggressively, carefully, like he was giving her time to decide whether closeness frightened her tonight. Sarah noticed every inch of that restraint. The room felt warmer suddenly, or maybe that was just her heartbeat. She looked toward him again, slowly. Neither spoke, because some moments became louder, without words. Alex's eyes dropped briefly toward her mouth, before returning carefully to her eyes again. Still asking permission without speaking. Always that. Always patience. Sarah's breathing changed slightly. Not fear. Anticipation. And somehow that scared her too. Because wanting somebody again felt dangerously close to trusting them. Alex lifted one hand slowly toward her face before stopping halfway, giving her room to pull away. Sarah didn't. His fingers brushed gently against her cheek. Warm, careful. Her eyes closed briefly from the softness of it. No rushing, no performance, just tenderness. The kind she once begged for from the wrong person. When Sarah opened her eyes again, Alex remained close enough that she could hear his breathing over the rain outside. Neither moved immediately. The tension stretched beautifully painful between them. Then Sarah whispered softly, You're still being careful with me. Alex answered, just as quietly. You've been hurt enough already. That sentence shattered the last emotional wall she still held on to. Sarah moved first, barely, just enough, and Alex met her halfway slowly. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate either. It felt cautious, emotional, two people touching something fragile without wanting to damage it. Sarah's fingers curled lightly into the sleeve of his hoodie while Alex kissed her like he understood exactly how much trust this moment required. No rushing, no hunger, just warmth, relief, care. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke immediately. Sarah rested her forehead lightly against his for one quiet second, while rain continued tapping softly outside the apartment windows. And for the first time since the night her husband abandoned her at the hospital, being close to someone no longer felt dangerous. 4 months later, Sarah stood barefoot in the kitchen, balancing the baby against her hip, while trying not to burn pancakes. The apartment smelled like vanilla coffee and butter, while soft gospel music played from a speaker near the sink. Morning sunlight stretched warmly across the counters. The baby laughed loudly after throwing a plastic spoon onto the floor for the third time in 2 minutes. Sarah looked down dramatically. "You paying rent today? Or just causing problems?" The baby squealed proudly. A knock sounded at the apartment door. 3 steady taps. Sarah smiled automatically. That smile happened too easily now. She opened the door without checking first. Alex stood outside carrying coffee and looking tired beneath a navy jacket. "You're late," Sarah said immediately. "I got trapped in a meeting." "You own the company." Apparently they still enjoy suffering. She laughed softly while stepping aside. Alex leaned down automatically toward the baby. "There she is." The baby reached toward him instantly. That sight still affected Sarah every time. Not because it looked forced, because it looked natural. Alex took the baby carefully, while Sarah returned toward the stove. "You burning breakfast again?" he asked. "I like my pancakes with personality. These got trauma." Sarah pointed a spatula toward him. "You criticize food constantly for somebody who can't dance." Low blow. The apartment carried warmth now. Routine, comfort. Not perfect. Still real. Some nights, Sarah still woke up anxious after bad dreams. Some days she still struggled trusting happiness fully. But life no longer felt heavy every second. And Alex became woven quietly into everyday moments. Morning coffee, late-night grocery runs, baby appointments, laundry conversations, peace. That word still surprised her sometimes. The baby grabbed Alex's watch curiously, while he bounced her gently near the couch. "You spoil her," Sarah said. "She manipulates me. She got that from me." I noticed. Sarah smiled to herself while flipping pancakes. Then came another knock at the door. Louder this time. Impatient. Sarah frowned slightly. "Were you expecting somebody?" Alex looked up immediately. "No." The knocking came again. Harder. Something about it shifted the mood inside the apartment instantly. Sarah wiped her hands slowly against a towel before walking toward the door. The second she opened it, her body went completely still. Her husband stood outside. For one long second, neither spoke. He looked thinner than before, more tired too, but his eyes moved immediately past Sarah's shoulder into the apartment behind her, toward the baby toys, the framed photos, toward Alex, standing near the couch, holding the baby. Everything changed in his expression after that. Shock first, then anger, then something uglier, jealousy. Sarah's heartbeat slowed strangely, instead of speeding up. Months ago, seeing him again would have shattered her emotionally. Now she mostly felt tired. Her husband looked back toward her face carefully. "You weren't answering my calls." Sarah blinked once, slowly. "You disappeared for months." "I know." "That's not an explanation." The hallway became quiet between them. Alex remained inside the apartment silently, not interrupting, not stepping forward aggressively, just present. That mattered. Her husband noticed him again immediately. "That him?" Sarah crossed her arms slowly. "Don't do this here." His jaw tightened instantly. "So there is a this." Sarah felt exhaustion settle into her chest immediately. Not heartbreak, exhaustion. Because somehow this man still expected emotional access after abandoning her at the hospital. Her husband finally looked fully toward Alex. Recognition flashed suddenly across his face. Not personal recognition, public recognition. "Oh," a bitter laugh escaped him. "Oh, you gotta be kidding me." Sarah frowned slightly. "What?" He looked back toward her sharply. "You replaced me with a millionaire?" The accusation echoed harshly through the hallway. Inside the apartment, the baby shifted uneasily at the sudden tension. Alex gently rubbed her back instinctively. Still calm, always controlled. Sarah stared at her husband quietly for several seconds before answering. "No." But he barely listened. His pride already took over. "You really moved on this fast?" "You left. I needed time. You vanished during labor." "That's not what happened." Sarah almost laughed from disbelief, not because anything felt funny, because hearing somebody rewrite pain so casually felt unbelievable now. "You stopped answering calls," she said quietly. "You ignored your daughter. You disappeared while I was recovering alone." Her voice stayed steady. "And now suddenly you want to explain." Her husband glanced toward Alex again. "Because now I see what this really is." Alex finally spoke calmly from inside the apartment. "You should lower your voice." Not threatening, not aggressive. just protective enough. That somehow irritated her husband more. Oh, there it is. He pointed sharply toward Alex. Rich hero saves struggling woman. Real inspirational. Sarah's face hardened slightly. You don't get to mock somebody who actually stayed. The hallway became still after that sentence. Her husband looked genuinely affected for the first time, because deep down, he knew it was true. The baby suddenly reached towards Sarah from Alex's arms with sleepy little hands. Alex stepped forward quietly and handed her over without inserting himself further into the confrontation. That restraint mattered. Her husband noticed it too. And somehow that calm maturity made him look even more unstable, emotionally. You really letting another man play family with my child? Sarah adjusted the baby carefully against her shoulder before answering. No. She looked directly at him. I'm letting my daughter grow up around peace. That line landed harder than shouting would have. Her husband's expression shifted again. Now came the manipulation, the softer voice, the regret performance. Sarah. He rubbed one hand across his face tiredly. I messed up. She stayed silent. I was scared. You left? I know. You kept leaving. That sentence carried months of pain inside it. Her husband stepped closer slightly. I can fix this. Sarah looked at him quietly, and for the first time since opening the door, she realized something important. She no longer wanted him to convince her. That feeling alone changed everything. Inside the apartment, Alex remained respectfully distant near the kitchen, not interfering, not controlling the moment, just there, if needed. That difference stood painfully obvious now. Her husband followed Sarah's eyes toward Alex again. Jealousy flashed across his face immediately. You really chose him over your family? Sarah answered calmly. You walked away from your family first. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The hallway air felt heavy with old damage and new reality colliding together. Then, finally, her husband realized something terrifying. Sarah was no longer emotional enough to chase him anymore. The tension from the apartment hallway followed Sarah for the next 2 days like humidity before a storm. Not loud, not explosive, just present. Her husband started calling again. Voicemails, texts, long, emotional paragraphs, arriving late at night. At first, Sarah ignored them completely. Then one message arrived that finally made her stop staring at the screen and sit down quietly on the edge of the couch. We need to talk face to face, not about him, about us. Sarah read the message 3 times before locking her phone again. There was no us anymore. That should have felt simple. Instead, old memories still complicated everything emotionally, because love didn't disappear neatly just because somebody caused pain. Alex noticed the shift in her mood immediately that evening. Of course he did. They sat quietly at the kitchen table while the baby slept nearby in the crib Alex built months earlier, still slightly crooked, still standing. Sarah pushed food around her plate absent-mindedly. Alex watched her carefully for a moment before speaking. You don't have to handle this alone. She looked up immediately. I know. And she meant it. That difference mattered now. Months earlier, those words would have sounded impossible to believe. Now they sounded true. Alex leaned back slightly in his chair. What do you want to do? Sarah stared down at her untouched food. I honestly don't know. That's okay. I hate that he still affects me emotionally. Alex answered quietly. That's normal. No. It's frustrating. The baby made a sleepy sound through the monitor nearby before settling again. Sarah rubbed both hands across her face slowly. I spent months trying to survive somebody leaving me. Her voice tightened slightly. And now he just walks back in expecting access again. Alex stayed silent, listening, always listening fully before speaking. Sarah looked toward him carefully. Does it bother you? What? That he came back? Alex thought about the answer honestly. Yes. The directness surprised her slightly, but he continued calmly. Not because I'm angry he showed up. A pause. Because I saw what his absence did to you. The room became quiet after that. Not tense. Emotionally honest. Sarah looked down slowly. Sometimes Alex understood her damage too clearly. That frightened her, in ways she still struggled explaining. Her phone buzzed again against the table. Another message. This one's shorter. Please. Sarah stared at it for several seconds before standing abruptly. I need air. Alex nodded once. No questions. No pressure. She stepped onto the apartment balcony, while cool Texas wind brushed softly across her arms. Traffic hummed below. City lights stretched endlessly across Dallas. For several minutes she simply stood there breathing, trying to separate guilt from reality, because part of her still felt cruel moving forward emotionally, while the father of her child stood outside that future completely. But another part of her remembered something important. He chose that distance first. The balcony door slid open quietly behind her. Alex stepped outside holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one without speaking. Sarah accepted it softly. "Thank you." The silence between them felt easier now, not empty, safe. After several moments, Sarah spoke quietly. "My family wants me to cut him off completely." Alex leaned lightly against the railing beside her. "And what do you want?" She laughed weakly through her nose. "That's the problem." Her eyes lowered toward the city below. "I spent so long adjusting myself around other people's choices. I don't even trust my own instincts anymore." Alex looked toward her carefully. "I think you do." Sarah frowned slightly. "What?" "You left the door open for him, emotionally, for months." A pause. "But when he finally came back," he studied her expression softly. "You didn't run toward him." That realization hit her quietly, because he was right. The old version of herself would have grabbed onto apologies immediately, would have begged for repair, would have accepted half-effort just to avoid abandonment again. But now, something inside her had changed. The apartment door suddenly opened loudly behind them. One of Sarah's cousins stepped halfway outside dramatically. "Okay, first of all," the cousin announced. Everybody inside pretending not to listen, but we absolutely listening. Sarah groaned instantly. "Oh my God." The cousin pointed toward her. "That man downstairs asking to talk." Alex straightened slightly immediately. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "Of course he is." The cousin crossed both arms. "You want backup?" "I'm not joining a street fight." Emotionally, maybe. Despite the tension, Sarah laughed softly. That tiny moment loosened the pressure inside her chest enough to breathe again. The cousin looked between Sarah and Alex carefully. Then quietly, "You look happier now." Sarah blinked once. The cousin shrugged. "That's all I'm saying." Then disappeared back inside the apartment. The balcony settled quiet again afterward. Sarah stared into her tea thoughtfully. "Happier feels dangerous sometimes." Alex answered gently. "Maybe because you spent too long surviving instead of living." That sentence stayed with her deeply. Eventually, Sarah looked toward him again. "You know what hurts the most?" "What?" "He only came back after seeing you." Alex's jaw tightened slightly. "Not jealousy. Understanding." "He saw you okay," Sarah continued softly. "He saw stability, help, peace." A bitter laugh escaped her quietly. "And suddenly now he wants family." Alex looked out toward the city lights before answering. "Some people don't value things until somebody else treats them properly." Sarah's chest tightened painfully, because that felt true too. Later that evening, Sarah finally agreed to meet her husband downstairs outside the apartment complex courtyard. Not alone. Her family watched carefully from upstairs windows, like unofficial neighborhood security, and Alex remained nearby without interfering, not controlling, not hovering, just present. The Texas night air felt warm against Sarah's skin as she approached the courtyard bench where her husband waited nervously. The second he saw her, he stood immediately. "You came." "I said I would." For several seconds, neither knew how to begin. Finally, he spoke first. "You look different." Sarah crossed her arms loosely. "I am different." That answer clearly unsettled him. He rubbed both hands together anxiously before speaking again. "I know I failed you." Sarah stayed quiet. "I was overwhelmed. You disappeared." "I know. You keep saying that, like it fixes anything." The frustration in her voice surprised even herself. Not explosive, controlled. That difference mattered. Her husband noticed too. "I didn't know how to handle becoming a father." Sarah looked at him carefully. "You could have said that." "I was ashamed." "You left me alone during labor." That sentence landed heavily between them again. Her husband looked down briefly. "I think about that night constantly." Sarah believed him. Strangely enough, she actually did. But belief no longer erased consequences. He stepped slightly closer. "When I saw you with him," his jaw tightened emotionally, "I realized how badly I messed up." There it was, the truth underneath everything. Jealousy, fear, replacement, not just love. Sarah noticed it clearly now. Her husband's voice grew sharper suddenly. "You replaced me with a millionaire." The accusation echoed through the courtyard harshly. For a second, old Sarah almost appeared again. The version of herself that panicked during confrontation. The version desperate to explain herself emotionally. But that woman no longer fully existed. Sarah looked at him quietly, calmly, then answered with a steadiness that surprised even her. No. He frowned immediately. Sarah held his gaze fully now. No. Her voice remained soft. I replaced pain with peace. The entire moment stopped after that sentence. Upstairs, several family members watching through windows went completely silent. Her husband stared at her like he genuinely didn't recognize this version of her anymore. Because he didn't. The old Sarah would have cried first, explained first, apologized first. This Sarah stood calmly inside her own healing. And suddenly, he realized he had already lost her long before tonight. By Sunday evening, the tension that had followed Sarah all week finally began easing out of the apartment. Not because the pain disappeared completely, because clarity arrived. Her husband stopped calling after the courtyard conversation. No dramatic goodbye, no final argument, just silence. And strangely, that silence no longer frightened her. The Texas evening air carried warmth through the open apartment windows, while gospel music played softly from the kitchen speaker again. Sarah stood near the stove stirring greens, while one cousin argued passionately with another over domino rules from the dining table. Some things never changed. Honestly, that felt comforting now. The baby laughed loudly from her playmat near the couch, while relatives continued taking turns making ridiculous faces at her for attention. Alex sat on the floor nearby, helping build colorful toy blocks he clearly did not fully understand. "You cheating?" one cousin accused immediately. "How do you cheat with blocks?" Alex asked calmly. "You got rich people confidence." "That's enough." Laughter spread through the apartment again. Sarah shook her head while smiling quietly to herself. Months ago, watching all these worlds blend together would have felt impossible. Now it looked natural. Messy, sometimes. Loud, always, but real. One older relative walked into the kitchen carrying cornbread dramatically. "If anybody touched this before prayer, we fighting." The entire apartment ignored the warning immediately. More laughter followed. The baby squealed loudly at the noise, while Alex instinctively reached down to steady one of her toys before it tipped over. Sarah noticed the movement automatically. That happened often now. She noticed him constantly. The way he checked bottle temperatures without thinking. The way he carried diaper bags like second nature. The way her daughter reached for him without hesitation. None of it felt forced anymore. That scared her once. Now it mostly made her emotional. A cousin suddenly pointed toward Alex from across the room. "You know what's still crazy?" Alex looked up carefully. "What? You stayed through all this?" The cousin waved dramatically around the loud apartment. "Most people run after 2 family gatherings." Alex glanced toward Sarah briefly before answering. "I like it here." Simple answer. But Sarah felt it deeply anyway, because she remembered the quiet loneliness behind his stories about childhood dinners and emotionally distant rooms. This apartment probably overwhelmed him constantly. Still, he stayed. The older aunt emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands slowly against a towel. The same aunt who distrusted Alex immediately months earlier. Now she studied him differently, still observant, but softer. "You fixing plates?" she asked him. Alex blinked once. "I can't." That wasn't a suggestion. "Yes, ma'am." One cousin nearly fell laughing. Oh, she bossing him around now. He officially family. Alex stood calmly and started helping organize plates, while the older aunt supervised aggressively from beside him. "No, not that spoon." She pointed sharply. "That one." "Yes, ma'am." "You scared of her?" Sarah asked from the stove. Alex answered, honestly. "A little." The older aunt nodded proudly. "Good." More laughter filled the apartment. Warm laughter. The kind that settled into walls and stayed there. Later that night, after dinner plates stacked high in the sink and several relatives finally headed home, the apartment grew quieter, not silent, comfortable. Soft gospel music still drifted from the speaker, while the baby sat happily in Alex's lap chewing aggressively on a toy giraffe. Sarah watched them quietly from the couch. That image affected her differently now, not with fear, with gratitude. The older aunt sat beside Sarah slowly, while watching Alex across the room. "You love him?" Straight to business. Sarah nearly choked on sweet tea. "Auntie," I asked a question. Sarah looked toward Alex again. He sat on the floor, helping the baby balance toy blocks while speaking to her in a calm voice. Patient, present, consistent. Her chest tightened softly. I think, she smiled faintly to herself. I trust him. The older aunt nodded slowly. That wasn't the question. Sarah laughed quietly under her breath. Then her expression softened again. Yeah, she admitted softly. I love him. The older woman studied her carefully for several seconds, not judging, just checking. Finally, she nodded once. You look peaceful. That sentence nearly made Sarah emotional immediately, because peace used to feel temporary in her life, like something people borrowed briefly before pain returned again. Now peace sat naturally in ordinary moments. Inside dinner, inside laughter, inside grocery runs and baby bottles and crowded family apartments. The older aunt stood slowly afterward. Well, she announced dramatically, long as he keep acting right, I approve him temporarily. Alex looked up from the floor immediately. Temporarily? Don't push it. The entire room laughed again. A little while later, after most relatives finally left, and the apartment settled into nighttime quiet, Sarah stepped onto the balcony carrying 2 cups of tea. City lights stretched endlessly beyond the apartment buildings, while warm Texas wind moved softly through the night. The balcony door opened behind her. Alex stepped outside carefully. After putting the baby down asleep, she finally surrendered? Sarah asked softly. After emotional negotiations, he accepted the tea from her before standing beside the railing quietly. For several moments, neither spoke. They didn't always need words anymore. That comfort still amazed Sarah sometimes. Inside the apartment, soft gospel music drifted faintly through the cracked balcony door. Somewhere below, distant traffic hummed steadily across Dallas highways. Sarah leaned lightly against the railing. You know, she smiled softly toward the city lights. This balcony used to feel lonely. Alex glanced toward her carefully. And now? She looked at him fully. Then, now it feels safe. The honesty between them no longer felt frightening. That changed everything. Alex rested both hands around the warm cup quietly. I almost walked past your room that night. Sarah blinked once. What? At the hospital. He smiled faintly to himself. I was irritated, distracted, ready to leave. Sarah listened carefully. But then I heard you crying. The memory settled gently between them. Hospital lights, fear, pain, a stranger stopping in the hallway. Sarah looked down briefly. That was the worst night of my life. Alex's voice softened. It changed mine, too. The Texas wind moved softly between them, while gospel music drifted faintly from inside the apartment. Sarah watched him quietly. No more emotional walls now. No pretending she didn't feel this deeply. Alex looked toward her fully then, and for the first time since they met, there was no hesitation in his expression anymore, only certainty. The night I held your hand. His voice stayed calm, but emotional underneath. I thought I was helping a stranger. Sarah felt tears gathering instantly. Alex stepped slightly closer. I didn't know God was introducing me to my future. That line settled deeply into the quiet night around them. Not dramatic, not performative. True. Sarah laughed softly through tears while shaking her head. You really waited till the emotional ending to say something like that? Alex smiled faintly. Timing matters. She wiped beneath one eye while laughing quietly again. Then she stepped closer herself this time. No fear, no hesitation, just trust. The baby monitor crackled softly from inside the apartment. One tiny sleepy sound followed. Both of them looked instinctively toward the balcony door at the exact same time, then laughed together softly. Real life, still happening around love. Sarah rested her forehead gently against Alex's chest while his arms wrapped carefully around her beneath warm Texas skies. And standing there surrounded by family, faith, healing, and the kind of peace she once believed belonged to other people, Sarah finally understood something powerful. The man who abandoned her during labor did not destroy her future. He accidentally moved her toward it.